This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Jamie Glazov Moment. Tonight, why Jihad targets children and the innocent. Why did a car plow into a crowd of 100 children and teachers in Sweden? Ladies and gentlemen, you probably haven't heard because our establishment media is busy with many things, including, of course, as always, criticizing Trump on every level and whatever our president is trying to do. And the establishment media is not going to focus on car jihad that's happening and increasing in Europe. It's also happened in the United States. And as we know, ISIS issued and issues the directive of many jihads that the devout Muslims should be obeying and following. And there's many jihads. There's knife jihad, but there's also car jihad. And so recently in Sweden, a car plowed into a crowd of children and their teachers. There were 100 children with 10 teachers. And now, thank God, only two, now, I mean, when I say, two children being injured that's enough, and that's tragic. It could have been much more, but it's bad. But when I say thank God, thank goodness nobody lost their lives. And, but now, so the driver fled, and witnesses were unable to describe even if it was a male or a female. There's a police manhunt underway, apparently, and the police had appealed to the public to come forward if they had seen anything, etc. But there's something a bit strange going on, because it's a little bit obvious that somewhere in Sweden they don't want the answers when certain dimensions are involved in a crime. For instance, the skyrocketing of rape in Europe and in these countries because of the migrants coming in, the Muslim refugees and the migrants. In a lot of these countries, because rape has skyrocketed, they avoid naming the ethnicity or especially the religion of the rapists. And so, yeah, okay, we don't know. There was a car that plowed into children, and yes, the guy got away, or, who knows, maybe it was a female. They got away, and we don't know, but it's worth a discussion, because there is a chance, because of knife jihad accelerating in Europe and in the West, and we know that now devout Muslims that are following Surahs 9:5 and 9:29, and ISIS and other terrorist groups are telling the devout Muslims throughout the world, just get the knife and stab a kafir, stab an infidel, stab an unbeliever. And this is skyrocketing and escalating in the West. And car jihad is also escalating. And there's a very large chance that this was car jihad. And ISIS has issued many directives. One of the biggest ones was in September 2014, where it very clearly stated all the ways that jihad should be pursued, including by car. Now, today what I wanted to talk about is, if this was jihad by car, and because there's jihad by car that's escalating throughout Europe, why are they targeting children? And I wanted to talk a bit about that today, because Anderson Cooper and Don Lemon and Rachel Maddow are not going to talk about it. They're not going to talk about car jihad, and they're not going to talk about why death cults target children, because this is no surprise. Anybody that's familiar with Islamic terror and with jihad should not be surprised that a car plowed into 100 children. Now, we just look back to the Manchester jihad attack, the Ariana Grande concert on May 22nd, 2017, not so long ago. And we know that Islamic terror attack targeted children. It singled out children. And I can continue to bring up many instances of how Islamic terror practices infanticide. And I wanted to spend a couple minutes on that this evening, because it is tragic, it is shocking, It is infuriating that our establishment media and our culture does not discuss this. We have an ideology that's waging war on our civilization and on our children, and we do not discuss it. Where have you seen this discussed? Where have you seen an hour-long feature on CNN or MSNBC or even the front page of New York Times and Washington Post where, they invite scholarly, professional experts to discuss why Islamic terror and jihad targets children and get into the texts and get into the belief system of this ideology? You don't find this anywhere. And I find that appalling because the truth should be spoken about, and I wanted to spend a couple minutes on that this evening. So, ladies and gentlemen, death cults always target children and the innocent. You've got to get Anna Geifman's book, Death Orders. She's a brilliant author, and she's written a book, Death Orders, and she studies death cults. Now, you can also just Google Anna Geifman and also Google the Glazov Gang, and you can see my discussions with her on this issue. And so Anna Geifman in Death Orders studies these death cults, Nazism, communism, and Islamic terror movements like Hamas. And it's a fascinating book, very important to read so that we understand what we're up against. Because she shows how Stalinists and the Bolsheviks, how they waged their war and how and they waged their revolutions, and how this involved the exploitation of the youth and the murderous attack on children and on the youth. She also analyzes fascism and Nazism, how the Hitler Jugend, the children of Germany, were exploited by Hitler and the Nazis. And in the worst of ways, they were given hand grenades to blow themselves up in certain operations, etc. So there's a certain infanticide that's going on. And Anna Geifman also shows, of course, in Islamic terror, in terms of Hamas and the work that she's done. She has shown and documented how, and we know this, and she's documented how Hamas practices this. And we know how other Islamic terrorist groups, how they exploit their own children and sacrifice their own children in their war against us. Why does this happen? Why Car Jihad, the jihadist attack in Manchester, the Ariana Grande concert when they attacked children? What's happening here? Well, let's begin with this, and Anna Geifman has also done work on this. The Jewish tradition, for instance, let's just begin with the, we're going to, yes, this is Judeo-Christian tradition, but let's just focus even on the Jewish tradition and Jewish theology for a moment. There is the choosing of life, and that's what Israel very much represents. Israel represents it, and Judaism and the Jewish tradition and Jewish theology, choosing life. Life is the priority, and life comes before everything else. Death cults do the opposite, okay? So, and there's no coincidence when, Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda and all of them, and when they used to boast and continue to boast that they love death as much as we love life. And so let's keep in mind this issue, because and also we add Christianity to this as well. The entire Judeo-Christian tradition is about the sacredness of human life. And death cults are the opposite. They hate life. Okay? So who are children and what do children represent? And Anna Geifman has done wonderful work on this, and I've spent my life thinking about this. So I credit her, and also some of these are my own views as well. But Anna Geifman has discussed, and on our program as well, children represent the future. They represent life. They represent innocence. Whereas when we look at the death cult of, for instance, of jihad and Islamic supremacism, it represents death. And that is why Al-Qaeda boasts about loving death and why ISIS boasts about it. And these are death cults. And I wanted to talk about that this evening because this is what we should be focusing on. This car by Jihad that just happened in Sweden. And car by Jihad is happening and is escalating, and our culture and our news media is not discussing it. So just a little bit more on things that I've been thinking about in connection to this. Because on a personal level, my whole life I've been given thought to this because my family escaped from the Soviet Union when I was a little boy, and I've dedicated my life to fighting these totalitarian ideologies, to fighting these death cults, whether it's Islamic supremacism and jihad or Nazism or communism, fighting all of these totalitarian death cults, because we see in them killing machines, but they're always attacking children. And so I wanted on a personal note to discuss some of my own thoughts, and not that they're greatly original or I've made any great discovery, but just in terms of my reading and thinking about these issues. And I wanted to mention this evening the miracle of Jesus Christ and Christ's death on the cross and the redemption and the salvation that we gain through Christ's presence, his present to us through his death on the cross. It's also hard to just find words of our gratitude and of that miracle of Jesus Christ. Why I'm mentioning this is when those of us who are Christian believe in this just tremendous and just, I always stumble a little bit here because sometimes it's hard to find words to describe this miraculous gift of Christ. And when we contemplate this, however, we have to remember that salvation is offered because there is a dark entity, because we are fallen, and there's also the existence of Satan, and there's the existence of Lucifer. And so I'm bringing this up because there is a spiritual battle occurring. And if we're blind to this, we're not going to completely understand exactly what's happening. And so we know that Satan is alive and well. We know that evil is alive and well. And children represent innocence. Children represent God's innocence. And the devil is waging war on God's innocence. He hates innocence. And that is why the devil hates children the most. And so we begin to tie these things together. We can start to connect the dots because it becomes very clear, those of us who are religious, those of us who are Christians, and I'm not saying that only Christians understand the spiritual battle. I'm not saying that. I'm just speaking as a Christian that we are entitled to discuss what we believe in our view and perhaps what we see going on in the world. And so we know that the devil is waging war on God's creation and that he hates innocence the most. And so we begin to understand Nazism and communism and Islamic Jihad, and we begin to understand why they target children. And so I wanted to share this evening, ladies and gentlemen, why Jesus Christ in the New Testament said, "Let the children come unto me." And it's very telling that Jesus also saved his most dire warning. Yes, he had many warnings. Perhaps it's one of his most dire warning. But he saved it for those who harm children. Because in the New Testament, he says that it's better to wrap a chain connected to a large stone and wrap it around your neck and throw yourself into the sea than to harm a child. And so it's no coincidence that while that is Jesus' position and warning, it is no surprise that Nazism and communism and jihad target children. Very important, I think, for our civilization to be thinking about this, because we need to be on the side of the innocent. We need to be on the side of children, and we hold them sacred, and we want to protect them, because for us, for Western civilization, for the Judeo-Christian tradition, the children come first in terms of saving them and venerating them. But for the death cults, they come first in terms of being attacked and in terms of being killed. I'd like to dedicate this Jamie Glazov moment this evening to Safi Roussos, the 8-year-old girl who was murdered in the Manchester attack when the jihadists attacked the Ariana Grande concert on May 22nd, 2017. Safi Roussos, an 8-year-old girl, died in that attack. And she represents all the innocent children that died in Manchester that tragic day. And I'd like to dedicate this program to her. And of course not to her alone, because Safi represents all the children that not only died on that day in Manchester, but she represents all the children that have died because of jihad, and because of death cults, and because of the Nazis, and because of the Stalinists, and the Maoists, and the Communists, all these totalitarian death cults. Let's think about them, and let's not forget about them, and let us be honest about what's happening in terms of these death cults. And ladies and gentlemen, it's not just the non-Muslim children, it's also the Muslim children. Because these totalitarian death cults, as I'm saying, also practice infanticide on their own. And so we also think about Aqsa Parvez, the 16-year-old Muslim girl who was murdered by her father and her brother in Toronto about 10 years ago. And even though it was 10 years, we still think of Aqsa Parvez because she didn't want to wear a hijab, and her father and her brother murdered her. And we will always remember, and we will always reflect, and we'll never forget Aqsa and all the thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of girls, of children, of women, and of all people that suffer under these death cults. We will never forget, and we will always remember. Thank you for joining the Glazov Moment this evening. Good night.